Yes, my name is Charles Edward Harrison.
And you currently live where?
I live at 5506 Crow's Nest Drive, Sykesville, Maryland.
And how long have you been a Carroll County resident?
Oh, I think I've been here since for 37 years.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And you were born and raised where?
Baltimore County, a place called the little black enclave called Turner Station, southeastern Baltimore County.
That was a traditional black enclave, wasn't it, for many, many years?
Yes, a viable place for employment was Bethlehem Steel Company.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Bethlehem Steel in its heyday was big, wasn't it?
Oh, geez, yes, yes.
Yes. And tell us about your military service. How did you get into the military?
Well, I was exposed to the military not in high school. I was a Boy Scout, Cub Scout, and came up through the ranks there. So I was inculcated into that spirit. Mm-hmm. When I was a student at Morgan State College, you were mandated at that time to take 2 years ROTC to obtain a deferment.
Right.
So I had 2 years, and I enjoyed those 2 years. So during my sophomore year, we had the option of joining the advanced ROTC. The benefits there is that they paid you $50 a month.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was a lot of fun for a struggling college student then.
Right, right. And many people don't realize how big ROTC was at one time in America, especially in land-grant colleges and state universities.
Oh, very, very much so. Some of the leading commanders, most people think finished West Point and the other military academies, but a number came from the ROTC program.
Exactly. I myself went to Western Maryland College, ROTC, and they had a lot of outstanding graduates who rose up through the ranks even to the level of general.
Yes.
And I think, were you in the ROTC program at Morgan when Richard Dixon was there?
Yes, I was. I was in the program, but I had the opportunity to take ROTC flight training while I was in that program, which was excellent. So flying and learning how to fly an aircraft became like a portion of the regular coursework.
Richard used to say he wasn't smart enough for that. He just jumped out of the airplane. I think he was in the paratroopers or something like that. And during your ROTC, after your ROTC training, you went into the you went into the Army. Yes,
I was commissioned as second lieutenant and went to infantry officers basic course at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I tried to join the Airborne Ranger program there. But at that time, they needed pilots, so they wouldn't allow potential pilots to take that program. So from Fort Benning, I went to Fort Walters, Texas, which is outside of Mineral Wells, Texas, and that was the primary phase of the rotary wing. But ironically, at that time, I was a fixed-wing pilot. And the typical military, well, we've got enough fixed-wing pilots, so you'll become a helicopter pilot.
And you became a helicopter pilot?
Yes, I did.
And then where did you serve as a helicopter pilot?
Well, after phase one, I went to Hunter Stewart Army Airfield for advanced training. And then I was sent to Vietnam. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
In Vietnam, I originally flew what was called Slicks, and that was the H model helicopters, the troop carriers. My first several days in country, I received fire, and I landed the helicopter and looked at the tail rotor, the tail boom area, and I saw this small puncture going in, and I saw this hole coming out the other side. That was when I made up my mind, if I'm going to get shot at, I need to shoot back. So I made the transition into armed helicopters, which was the old B model helicopters that were converted, regular troop carriers, converted to armed helicopters. Right.
And then so what was your time in Vietnam? How long did you spend?
I spent it exactly almost to the day, one year.
Wow. Wow. And any rough count on how many missions you flew?
Oh, every day we got up to fly, and I was the aircraft commander and commander of what was called Cougar Team. I flew for the 57th Assault Helicopter Company, and they were the folks transporting the troops for combat assaults, and we provided the gun cover for them. We supported medevac missions. We would participate in what was called hunter-killer teams. Mm-hmm. And that's where we would go into enemy-infested areas and try to locate and destroy the enemy. That involved having 2 armed helicopters that were flying high and a Loach, which was be flying very low, just above the treetops to locate the enemies and to draw fire. When they received fire, that's when we would come down from above and punch off rockets and try to take out those enemy positions.
It's easy to describe, but it's pretty terrifying to do, isn't it?
Well, at 20 and 21 years old, it was exciting. And at 21, I was considered an old guy in Vietnam because the basic troops, my pilots that actually flew for me and was part of my team, were 18, 19-year-olds that were drafted and had an opportunity to go to warrant officer candidates training to become pilots. So their sole mission and job was to fly. I had additional duties, supply officer, mess officer. As a commissioned officer, you had other duties aside from just flying.
Other duties as assigned, right?
As assigned, correctly.
Great old Army military phraseology, which means we'll make you do any damn thing we want.
Very much so. Very much so.
Did you ever lose a plane, your plane?
No, not really receiving fire, but there was always somebody there. We flew in teams, and we flew particularly about 10 feet off the tops of the trees. Right. Limited the exposure for us as we flew from point A to point B, whereas the slicks, the troop carriers, were high enough to avoid enemy fire. Mm-hmm. As we progressed in Vietnam, though, the enemy got very good at learning how to lead the helicopter in their fire, so they would shoot in advance of the helicopter, and the helicopter would fly into it. It's almost like shooting trap or dove or bird hunting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That same technique was developed during the Second World War, where the German anti-aircraft fire was fired ahead of the B-17 bombers flak, correct. And they flew into it. They didn't actually shoot at the planes.
That's correct. So they got very good. But when an aircraft went down, there was always somebody there to pick you up. They always said, remain with the aircraft, but me being the logical thinker that I am, I'm thinking, well, if the enemy saw where my aircraft went down, they're headed that way also.
Right.
So it's a matter of who gets to you first.
Right, right. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen to you.
No,
and you came home to us, which was a real blessing.
Well, I assumed going into the situation I would be shot. It's just the extent of the wound that I was concerned with, because pilots had armor plating around them, so the vulnerable areas were your head and your legs and your feet. So it was, I assumed I would get shot, and I didn't want to come back limping or without a limb. No. We did lose several pilots during my stay in Vietnam.
Right. It's always a tragedy to lose anyone, regardless of rank or position and so forth. I served in the Korean War in a MASH outfit, and so we had lots of casualties come through, and it's a real tragedy when you lose some.
Yes, very much
because there's a loved one somewhere who's going to hurt very badly as a result of it. Now, how long did you continue to stay in the service?
Well, after Vietnam, I was a captain at that point, captain over 3, due for a second tour in Vietnam. So I received orders to go to the infantry officers school back at Fort Benning as an instructor. I didn't want to do that. My basic background is education. I'm a teacher by profession. So I hand carried my orders back to OPO infantry branch and asked for a reassignment. They reassigned me to Fort Meade, Maryland, and I was acting commander of 1st Army Support Element out of Fort Meade. And they had about 475 troops, so I commanded that unit until which was, I guess, about a year and a half, 2 years. And it was there that from there I went into the FBI and stayed there for 28 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you were an FBI agent then?
I was a supervisory special, well, you start as an agent, but I progressed through the ranks, FBI inspector, and assistant inspector, and then was a supervisory special agent. So I managed the Presidential Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force for the Mid-Atlantic region here out of Baltimore. So I supervised drugs and narcotics cases from Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Richmond, and Norfolk. A lot of the Maryland State Police officers that were working on the task forces were sworn in and deputized, and they came under my purview to ensure that they were working appropriate level drug cases.
Well, that's very good. So eventually you retired as a federal employee.
Yes, I did. I went after the inspection staff. I went to State Department as a special advisor for the Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Organized Crime, Bob Gilbart. I wrote and set up the U.S. policy for organized crime and drug cases that went outside of the U.S. ILEA, which was the law enforcement academy that was set up in Budapest. I controlled the funding for that and getting appropriate instructors to establish a bureaucracy in the former states of the Soviet Union. I call them the Ikistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. Left there and went to the agency to assist in setting up their international organized crime program. And so I stayed working for the CIA in international organized crime until I retired.
Well, it sounds like you've had a very wonderful career, starting with the ROTC program at Morgan State.
Best program that I can imagine. I would recommend any parent to try to encourage their male children and females nowadays to participate in that program. It gets you away from home. It teaches you responsibility. It teaches you leadership skills. The program just does wonders for young men to make them men.
I totally agree with you. We have a couple junior ROTC programs, as you probably know, at high schools here in Carroll County. And I always say that it's a good program for young men to get involved with. Of course, they have young women in them even nowadays, today, yes. And go on to ROTC. I wished it was as strong as it used to be when I was going through college in the early 50s and so forth. But we got to mention one other thing. Somewhere along this line of your history there, you wound up meeting somebody named Virginia.
Yes, Virginia. I met her on a train going to work. She worked for the FBI also in Washington, D.C., and I was transferred back from Philadelphia to the Washington, D.C. area. So I met her commuting to Washington. And we dated and eventually married, and I have 2 kids and 3 grandkids. And she's currently a member of the Carroll County School Board. Very active lady in the community.
As were you. You were at one time serving as an Orphans Court judge?
Yes, I served 2 years as the appointed Orphans Court judge, where I tried to bring some organizational skills to that capacity. With the FBI, I'm accustomed to reviewing cases and conducting interviews of people over the 28 years. So I brought that to the table and how to conduct the thorough interviews, how to listen and respond to questions and get to the root of the issues. So I really enjoyed my 2 years there. I was also one of the ethics commissioners for Carroll County under Dick Simmons. after I retired. So after retiring from the FBI, I attempted to become more and more involved in the community here and what's going on in Carroll County here.
Well, Charles, we certainly thank you for your magnificent contributions in the ROTC, in Vietnam as an active duty military participant, and certainly as a resident of Carroll County, and all that you and your wife and your family have brought to Carroll County. You're a great example of a veteran and what a veteran can contribute to our county. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Skip. I appreciate the opportunity.